The laughter at the table had that polished, practiced sound, the kind that belonged in glossy family photos, not real life. Crystal glasses clinked, the lasagna smelled of perfection, and for one fleeting second, Maya Wells thought maybe, just maybe, this dinner would be different. It wasn't. Gloria Wells, her mother, sat at the head of the table, posture flawless, her gold bracelet catching the chandelier light every time she raised her glass. Across from her, Victoria, the eldest sister, a lawyer with a voice that filled courtrooms, was basking in applause for her recent promotion. The family's pride, the golden one, beside her, Ivy, the youngest, all curls and chaos, swirled her wine, laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. She was the free spirit, the family's artist, the one Gloria called my heart in human form. And then there was Maya, 32, divorced, an English teacher in a small public high school. She'd come straight from grading essays, her clothes still smelling faintly of chalk dust, when Gloria raised her glass and toasted, "To my daughters, the brilliant lawyer, the fearless artist, and—" She hesitated, eyes flicking to Maya, "our steady rock." The room laughed. Even the word steady sounded like an insult when Gloria said it. Maya smiled, as she always did, that tight, polite curve of lips that hid everything else. Then, between dessert and coffee, Ivy leaned forward, her voice sugar-sweet. "You know, Maya, sometimes I think life would have been easier if you'd never been born." It hit like a blade slipped between ribs. Victoria laughed first, then Gloria. Even their father, Peter Wells, chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Ivy, you're terrible." Maya set her fork down, slowly, deliberately. Her pulse thundered, but her voice came calm, sharp as glass. "That feeling's mutual. Ivy, the difference is, I actually have the power to make that wish come true." The room froze. The air thickened. Gloria's smile faltered. Victoria's laughter died. Ivy blinked, confused. And for the first time in 32 years, silence fell over the Wells family table. Maya leaned back, her eyes steady. Somewhere deep inside, something long asleep had started to wake. That night would be the last she ever spent in her mother's house. The silence that followed that dinner didn't begin that night. It had been echoing through Maya Wells's life since childhood, long before she learned to smile through it, long before she realized she had become the family's background noise. When Maya was 10, she wrote an essay that won first place in the district's Young Writers Contest. Her teacher called the Wells home to congratulate her. Gloria Wells, her mother, listened, said thank you, and hung up. That evening, she looked at the certificate for less than a second before turning to Victoria, the eldest, who had just been accepted into the regional science fair. "That's wonderful. Maya, now, Victoria, let's make sure your project is perfect. This could really help with college." The praise slid past Maya like air. She folded her certificate carefully, tucked it into a drawer, and told herself that next time she'd earn something that mattered. 2 years later, she sang solo in the middle school choir concert. Her voice trembled at first, then grew strong and pure. The applause was warm, but in the audience, Gloria's eyes were fixed on Ivy, the youngest, who had been doodling hearts on her program. After the show, Peter Wells, her father, patted Maya's shoulder. "That was nice, sweetheart. You've got a good hobby. Not a gift, not a talent. A hobby." By the time Maya reached high school, she understood her role: dependable, responsible, unseen. She became the one who remembered birthdays, who cleaned up after the laughter died down, who made sure her sisters got what they needed, the one who kept the peace. Every family photo told the same story: Victoria in the center, confident, Ivy leaning into her mother's arm, and Maya always on the edge, smiling just enough to prove she was fine. At 19, she got a scholarship to a small college. No one attended her orientation. Gloria said she couldn't take time off work. Peter said gas was expensive. When she graduated with honors, she mailed home a photo in her cap and gown. It stayed unframed in a kitchen drawer until it yellowed around the edges, years later. When Victoria won her first case, Gloria threw a dinner party with candles and champagne. When Ivy sold her first painting to a friend of a friend, Gloria posted it online with pride. When Maya earned her teaching degree, Gloria sent a one-line text. "That's good, dear. Teaching suits you." Through the years, Maya kept trying sending cards, organizing holidays, buying thoughtful gifts, believing that if she was patient enough, kind enough, she'd eventually be seen. But invisibility had become her inheritance. She remembered birthdays they forgot, showed up to gatherings they barely noticed she attended, and stayed until the dishes were done. When she left, no one asked if she got home safely. And yet, every time she saw her family at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at endless celebrations for everyone else, she carried the same quiet hope that maybe this time would be different. That hope had died the night Ivy said, "I wish you were never born." Now, sitting alone in her apartment, Maya stared at the framed essay certificate on her shelf. The paper was fading, the ink dull, but the words still mattered. Truth matters most when it's hardest to speak. As she ran her fingers along the edge of the frame, she realized she had spent her entire life whispering truths no one wanted to hear. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop whispering. 3 weeks after the first dinner, Gloria Wells called again, her voice warm, rehearsed, pretending nothing had happened. "We're having everyone over Saturday to celebrate Victoria's new case win. I'm making lasagna. You'll come, won't you?" "Sweetheart," Maya hesitated, the phone cold in her hand. Every instinct told her not to go. Yet something inside whispered that she needed to see the truth clearly one last time. So she said yes. By the time she arrived, the Wells house was glowing candles flickering, music low, the smell of garlic and sugar in the air. Victoria Wells, now a rising attorney with her own office downtown, was radiant in a silk dress, champagne in hand. Ivy, all color and chaos, floated around the room showing photos of her latest art installation, a mess of paint and wire Gloria described as pure genius. Peter Wells poured wine, grinning at his wife as if life had been kind to them. Only Maya's chair looked untouched, no glass, no napkin folded with care. She quietly fixed it herself. Dinner began with laughter, the safe kind that fills silence but means nothing. Gloria clinked her glass. To Victoria, my star, and to Ivy, my heart, and to Maya, our constant. There it was again. Constant. Not clever, not brave, just constant. A placeholder word for someone who didn't fit anywhere else. The conversation turned to Victoria's courtroom victories. "You should have seen the judge's face," she bragged. "Even opposing counsel congratulated me afterward." Gloria beamed, pride blooming like light. Maya smiled, the same way she always did, invisible between the glow of her sisters. When the talk shifted to Ivy's art, Gloria's voice turned syrupy. "Your creativity amazes me, darling. You make the world brighter." Ivy leaned back, pretending to blush. "Thanks. Mom." I just let my emotions lead the brush. Maya took a sip of her water. Waiting for her turn, it never came. When she finally spoke, it was soft. "One of my students just won a state writing contest. She worked so hard for it, but Gloria was already turning toward Victoria. Honey, tell us about that client you impressed last week." The dismissal landed like a slap. Maya forced a smile and kept eating. The plates emptied, the wine flowed, the jokes grew sharper. It started with teasing about Maya's quiet little life. Then came the old stories, cruel ones dressed as nostalgia. Victoria laughed. "Remember when we convinced you were adopted, or when we said your dolls ran away because you were boring?" Ivy added, eyes bright. Even Peter chuckled. "You girls were terrible." "We were," Gloria agreed, wiping her eyes. "Poor Maya, always believing everything." They laughed harder. Maya laughed too, a dry, careful sound. But her chest ached. Each memory was a reminder she'd been their punchline for decades. When dessert came, chocolate cake frosted to perfection, Gloria served Victoria first, then Ivy, then Peter. Maya's slice came last, smaller, slightly cracked on the edge. She stared at it, appetite gone. Victoria raised her fork, grinning. "Hey, remember when we told you your face would stick if you frowned too long?" The table burst into laughter again. Even Gloria laughed, shaking her head. "You really were so gullible." "Maya," something inside her shifted. Not a break, but a turning, a cold, crystalline awareness that she had been auditioning for love her entire life, and no one was watching. Maya put her fork down slowly. Her hands didn't shake. She looked around the table at her father's easy grin, at her mother's polished pride, at her sister's smug smiles, and realized she was the only one who didn't belong to this performance. The laughter kept going, echoing like glass shattering in her ears. She smiled faintly, though her eyes burned. "You know," she said quietly, "some jokes age badly." No one heard her. No one ever did. Later that night, driving home through the dark, Maya replayed the scene again and again. Every word, every laugh, every careless dismissal, and for the first time in her life, she stopped blaming herself for their blindness. Because the truth was simple, she wasn't invisible. They had just refused to see, and that realization, sharp and steady, was the beginning of her leaving. The next morning, sunlight spilled through thin curtains, slicing across the dust floating in Maya Wells's small apartment. The night's laughter still echoed in her head, cruel and sharp as broken glass. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces, her mother's polished smile, her sister's laughter bouncing off the walls. By noon, something inside her had settled into clarity. For once, she didn't want to disappear quietly. She needed to look her mother in the eye and ask why. Why love had always been rationed like oxygen. Why she had been treated like furniture instead of family. She drove to her parents' house, her hands gripping the wheel until her knuckles whitened. The world outside looked normal, neat lawns. Mailboxes gleaming, but everything inside her was changing. Gloria Wells opened the door, surprise flickering across her face before smoothing into politeness. "Maya, what a nice surprise. Come in. Coffee?" The smell of cinnamon and bleach filled the kitchen. Maya sat down at the table she'd grown up around, the same one where she'd celebrated other people's birthdays, other people's victories. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Gloria looked up from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Of course." Maya hesitated, her throat tight. "Have you ever been proud of me?" Gloria blinked, taken aback. "What kind of question is that?" "You know I love you." "That's not what I asked," Maya whispered. "I asked if you've ever been proud." Gloria sighed, leaning against the counter. "Maya, you've always been so sensitive. You have a stable job. You're independent, that's good enough. Not everyone can be like Victoria or Ivy. You don't need constant praise. There it was, again, good enough. The phrase that had haunted her since childhood. A quiet sentence that meant never enough. Maya nodded slowly, staring at the sunlight trembling across the table. "I used to think being quiet kept me safe, that if I didn't cause trouble, you'd notice me one day. But I think what you really wanted was for me to stay small enough not to matter." Gloria's smile thinned. "Maya, that's not fair. You're overreacting." Maya stood. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "No, Mom, I'm finally reacting." For a moment, the house went still. Gloria crossed her arms, defensive, uncomprehending. Maya took one last look around the framed photo of her sisters on the mantel, the spotless perfection that had always excluded her, and felt a strange calm wash over her. "You don't have to worry. Mom, you won't have to pretend anymore." Then she turned and walked out the door. The air outside felt different, cleaner, lighter, the kind of air you breathe when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space. That was the moment Maya decided to disappear, not as a victim, but as someone finally awake. That night, the city outside Maya Wells's window hummed softly, cars sliding through wet streets, streetlights flickering like tired eyes. She sat on her couch, still dressed from earlier, her mother's words circling in her head like ghosts that refused to rest. Good enough. Too sensitive. Not everyone can be like your sisters. Each phrase cut deeper the more she replayed it. On the table beside her, a framed essay certificate sat next to a stack of graded papers from her students. She traced the edge of the frame, remembering the 10-year-old girl who had believed words could change the world. That same girl now realized silence could, too. For years, Maya had believed that staying meant strength, that loyalty, even when unreciprocated, was love. But love that demanded you disappear was not love at all. It was erasure, dressed as duty. At midnight, she opened her laptop. The screen's glow lit her face as she typed teaching positions, Seattle. The list filled quickly: new schools, new cities, new beginnings. She bookmarked 3 listings, each farther away than the last. She applied to all of them before dawn. By morning, her inbox was filled with automated confirmations. Each one felt like a breath drawn deeper than the last. She made coffee, opened her phone, and deleted every saved number labeled Home, Gloria, Victoria, Ivy, Peter, one by one. Her thumb hovered over the final contact, her mother, before pressing delete. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. That afternoon, the phone rang again. Gloria's voice spilled from the voicemail speaker. Light and false. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean to upset you. You know how Ivy jokes. Call us." "Okay." Then Victoria Mom's worried. "Stop being dramatic." Then Ivy, almost laughing. "You'll call back. You always do." Maya didn't. She turned her phone face down and packed a box, one single box of things that truly belonged to her, a worn copy of Jane Eyre, a seashell from her first solo trip, a few framed photos of her students. Everything else, furniture, clothes, gifts from birthdays she'd spent alone, she left untouched. When the next call came, she didn't even check who it was. She unplugged the phone entirely. The quiet felt like standing in sunlight after years underground. Days blurred into a ritual of release. She filed her resignation at school, signed an apartment lease in Seattle, sold her car, and booked a one-way flight. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't tell anyone where she was going. A week before her move, there was a knock on the door. Maya froze. Then her mother's voice filtered through the wood, shaky, unfamiliar. "Maya, please, let's talk. I just want to see you." Maya pressed her hand against the door, feeling the vibration of Gloria's soft sobs on the other side. For a moment, her throat tightened. Years of instinct screamed at her to open it, to fix, to comfort, to forgive. But she didn't move. "I almost opened it," she whispered to herself. "But every time I do, I lose a piece of me." Gloria's voice cracked once more before fading down the hallway. When silence returned, Maya finally exhaled. That night, she stood at her window watching rain fall against the glass. Each droplet streaked down like the years she'd spent waiting for someone else to give her permission to live. Now, she was granting it to herself. Her disappearance wasn't an escape. It was an act of creation, the deliberate erasure of the version of herself that existed only to serve others. By the time the first light of dawn crept across her apartment, she had made her decision absolute. Maya Wells, the forgotten middle child, would vanish from their world completely, and for once, it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a beginning. Seattle greeted Maya Wells with rain and quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't demand explanations. She moved into a small apartment with peeling paint and big windows that overlooked a narrow street. The space felt raw, imperfect, alive. Every sound, the hum of traffic, the clatter of the neighbors' dishes felt like proof she existed somewhere new. Her first morning there, she woke before sunrise, the city still half asleep. She brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching her reflection fade as the light rose. It struck her how different silence felt now. Back home, silence had meant being ignored. Here, it meant peace. Within a week, she started her new job at West Haven High School. Her classroom was small but full of light. The first time a student greeted her, "Good morning," Ms. Wells, she almost didn't recognize the sound of her own name spoken with warmth. The rhythm of her days began to form lessons, laughter, quiet papers graded late at night. No one here knew about Victoria, or Ivy, or Gloria. No one compared her, dismissed her, or used her as a mirror for someone else's shine. For the first time, she felt seen for who she was, not as the quiet one, but as someone who mattered. Back home, things were unraveling. It started with a voicemail from Peter Wells, her father, left on her old school line. The secretary played it for her by mistake. His voice trembled. "She's our glue. Please tell her we miss her. Tell her. The house doesn't sound the same without her." But Maya didn't call back. She later heard through a distant cousin's Facebook post that Gloria had stopped hosting dinners. Victoria and Ivy had fought over something small, a shared account, a canceled trip, but it had turned into weeks of not speaking. The laughter that had once filled the Wells home was gone. The irony wasn't lost on her. They used to mock her for being quiet, and now silence was all they had left. One evening, sitting by the window with her tea, Maya thought about that, not with joy or vengeance, but with something gentler closure, the kind that doesn't shout. It just settles in the chest and stays. When the phone rang again, she let it. When another letter arrived, she placed it unopened in a drawer. Forgiveness didn't require answers. Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the glass like a soft metronome. Maya smiled faintly, realizing this was her rhythm, now calm, steady, self-chosen. In Seattle, she wasn't a daughter defined by others. She was a woman who had reclaimed her own sound, and the silence she left behind had finally taught them what her presence had always been worth. Years drifted by like pages turning quietly in a book. Maya Wells no longer measured time by holidays or family calls. Her life had its own rhythm now, the rhythm of peace. Seattle, once foreign, had folded around her like a soft blanket. She'd built something simple yet solid, a job she loved, friendships that didn't demand explanation, and mornings that began with silence instead of tension. At West Haven High, she became known as the teacher who listened. Students lingered after class to talk about poems and heartbreak, about futures that scared them. She kept a jar on her desk labeled "Things We'll Figure Out Later." It was always full of anonymous notes, fears, hopes, questions. Somehow, helping others find their voices had helped her rediscover her own. One rainy afternoon, she ducked into a small bookstore to escape the drizzle. The bell above the door chimed softly. And that's where she met Noah Green. He stood in the poetry aisle, frowning at a book of Neruda's verses. "Do you think love poems sound sadder in translation?" he asked, half joking. Maya smiled, not the polite smile she used to wear, but the kind that reached her eyes. They talked about books, language, and the courage it takes to start over. What began as a shared coffee became long walks, quiet laughter, and the kind of companionship that felt effortless. Noah never asked about her past right away. When she finally told him, he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "You didn't run away. Maya, you set yourself free." Their love grew gently, like ivy finding sunlight after years in shade. When he proposed 2 years later, it wasn't in grand gestures or crowded rooms, just a quiet evening on the porch, candles flickering, rain whispering against the roof. Their wedding was small. No Gloria, no Victoria, no Ivy. Instead, there were colleagues from school, her students who read poems, and the bookstore owner who brought flowers wrapped in old pages of poetry. It wasn't loud or lavish, but it was honest, and that honesty was the most beautiful thing Maya had ever known. Months later, a letter arrived from her mother. The envelope was hand-addressed, the handwriting shaky. Maya sat by the window for a long time before opening it. The letter was full of apologies, of regrets written too late. Gloria wrote that the house was quiet now, that the dinners had stopped, that she finally understood what Maya's silence had meant. Maya didn't cry. She didn't feel anger either, just a calm acceptance. She folded the letter gently and tucked it in a drawer beside her essay certificate, 2 pieces of paper that had defined the bookends of her life. Forgiveness, she murmured, isn't the same as returning. Years passed softly. She and Noah bought a small home near the coast, where the sea hummed like a living heartbeat. And when their daughter was born, Maya named her Aurora Green Aurora, for the dawn that follows the darkest night. Holding the tiny bundle in her arms, Maya whispered, "You will never wonder if you belong." Aurora's laughter filled every quiet space that had once been heavy with absence. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, Maya would step outside to watch the horizon blush with morning. She would think about the house she left behind, how it might still stand, immaculate and empty, but she no longer saw that memory with pain. It was simply a chapter she had already finished, because in Seattle, in the life she built from the ashes of silence, Maya Wells was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was loved, and for the first time, she truly belonged. And as the sun rose over the Pacific, she understood the curse that once wished her gone had become her greatest blessing. Morning light poured through the kitchen window, painting gold across the table where Maya Wells sat with a cup of tea and her daughter Aurora drawing beside her. Outside, the ocean whispered steady, endless, forgiving. Aurora held up her picture. "Look, Mommy. It's the sun coming back." Maya smiled, her chest swelling with quiet gratitude. Once, she'd lived her life waiting for approval that never came. Now, she lived surrounded by warmth she'd built herself. On a shelf behind her rested 2 framed papers, the childhood essay that once made her invisible and the letter of apology that came too late. They no longer hurt to look at. They were proof of survival, of the distance between who she was and who she'd become. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft hum of peace filling the room. "They lost me," she whispered, "but I found myself." Outside, the tide shifted, glimmering like glass. Maya lifted her daughter into her arms, sunlight spilling around them. For years, silence had been her prison. Now it was her sanctuary. And as the waves rolled in, she understood sometimes walking away is the loudest way to be heard.